are very much in sync there. The programs that are working for young people are comprehensive programs that offer not only technical skills training, but also life skills training. They are matched with some subsidies to help with the cost of training. They are matched with career guidance for these young people. And they're definitely matched with the job search assistance. Those programs that are very effective are in collaboration with employers. So the employers are engaged many times ahead of time, providing commitments for internships or apprenticeships. And those employers are also continuing the training process and mentoring these young people in the workplace. So it's an all-around investment. And obviously, these programs are expensive when you look at the cost versus the outcomes. They're also rather small. If you really look across the board, they're providing results in hundreds or maybe thousands, and the problem is in millions. So you gave the example of the programs in Latin America, what they are called Jóvenes programs, but there's also Year Up in the United States and Youth Build across the world. They also tend to be sector-specific, targeting a specific type of skills within an industry. That seems to be working better. And again, I think that the collaboration between who trains the people, who employs those young people is very, very important. What we have a problem is definitely the replicability and scalability of these programs and how to design them. There's also an additional problem is that every young person is slightly different and requires a different type of attention. So it's also, before they enter a good, successful, comprehensive program, we need to assess them properly, and we need to send them and impact their different lacks at different levels. So it seems that also concepts like we have in the United States with one-stop system, and also some other countries have with career centers where young people are first assessed for their specific needs and then sent to different providers for those services is very important. I think what is also crucial is to learn from evaluations and that have been done, not enough of them and not nearly enough in all the details that we want to know, but it's very important to do more monitoring and evaluation of existing programs. And I would add one more thing. There are new tools to actually evaluate programs as they are performing, such as, for example, ETO software, the efforts to outcome software from Social Solutions for human service organizations, where you are actually looking at what particular interventions create the most outcomes. And therefore, you can fine-tune the programs while they are running, as opposed to waiting until years after and saying, well, that program was good, but if only they did also this one thing. And the other thing is the collective impact concept, that looking at when we have several stakeholders addressing a particular problem and having some a very special shared measurements, backbone organization, particular value system, that these organizations are really working together. There is a way how to make these multi-stakeholder engagements much more successful. I think we need to use more technology, just like technology is definitely changing the way higher education is operating, with all these massive online courses available these days. I think also very soon we will have a Khan Academy for life skills. There will be a breakthrough, and we're just waiting for it to happen, where we will be able to deliver really personalized, intensive, experiential training through virtual classrooms in multiple languages around the world. And hopefully the cost will come down, and therefore everybody will be more excited about participating. We are in the process of studying apprenticeship systems and mentorship systems, because it seems that expanding that concept to many different types of skills, and also engaging employers, providing them with a real value proposition why to engage in these types of programs is really essential going forward for all types of jobs. I just don't see that our educational system will be able to follow the pace of change in terms of jobs. But anyway, for now, that much. I have a lot more if you want. Thank you.
Thanks, Branka, especially for the hopeful notes. Okay, to turn to my last panelist for the directed question, Mona. Mona, you've been working on the topic of skills, and I understand you're coming up with a major report. I'd like you to tell us about that, but also react to one of the key messages from the book, that many of the problems related to skills actually need to be addressed outside the training system. And we heard this from our panelists today as well. Basically, that there are many market failures underlying the low private investment in skills, and these need to be addressed by making improvements outside the training system, making product markets work better, providing access to credit, providing information to workers, having contracts that deal with the poaching of trained workers, and improving the bargaining power of workers. Many of the panels have touched upon each of those issues, but I'd like to turn to you for your take on those questions.
Sure. And likewise with all the panelists, thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. I think I would begin by saying, what do we mean by a system? Because, frankly, when you look at the education to employment system that exists in the world today, I would argue it's fundamentally broken. And it is broken because there are information failures in terms of youth and their parents not knowing enough about career pathways and options and professions which can be attractive and where you go in order to be a part of those professions. It is broken because simply there is a lack of engagement between employers and education providers. So, for example, one of the things which we found in our research is that there is actually a very low level of frequency of interaction between employers and education providers. And so it is little surprise that we keep missing each other. And beyond that, there's also very little incentive to walk into each other's worlds. So, for example, if you are an education provider, you worry a lot about how to get youth into your institution. You don't worry a lot about how to exit them well into the job market. And imagine a world where education institutions were indeed monitoring job placement rates, not just 3 months out or 6 months out, but actually over 5 years, and actually understanding where their graduates go and what are the wages associated with them. And Colombia actually has one of the labor observatories which is seeking to do something along those lines. So you could imagine a world that looks quite different from the one that we live in today, and that would cause behavior to look very different than what we see today. So all of that just simply goes to the point of we could think very differently about what is in the system. It's not just the training element, but it is all of these complementary pieces. And that I think is probably what the world needs most, because to address what Branka mentioned, yes, absolutely. We do need to increase the frequency of the very small examples of success which we see around the world. I mean, there are legions of programs which I think all of us can point to and say they have been successful in terms of employability outcomes, but they are small and far in between. And so the question of how do you increase the frequency, how do you increase the scale, I would argue until we rethink the system, there will be nothing that makes it spontaneously generate. It will always be because there was some enlightened employer that brought together a set of other employers that then worked with education providers to make something happen. And it's almost like you have to be in an Olympics in order to be able to get to a good outcome. And the world does not have enough of such heroes. We need to make this something that is much more systemic. So that is to the system argument. And linked to that, I would say like one of the chief obstacles which we face is that there is an appalling lack of data about the journey from education to employment. I mean, I think that multiple of the panelists are pointing to things where we're beginning to see some body of data that we can point to, or we're actually just trying to create it. But frankly, we are in our education to employment knowledge probably where school systems were about 12 years ago, which was pre-PISA, right? And there is just not enough to know what is actually working, where are people going, where are the obstacles, how do you think about the different segments of youth and the different segments of employers, because certainly they are not all monolithic. And until we have that body of knowledge in place, it's going to be very difficult, except for experimentation, to be able to say this is what needs to actually be done. And so I would argue that one of the most important precursors to being able to reconstruct these systems is actually tackling the data front. And I think that there are a number of experiments that are happening or are in motion as we speak, and that probably over the next 2 to 5 years we're going to see, I hope, a surge on the data front so that we can be much more informed and much more deliberate about what happens in this space. You asked me to speak briefly about the report. So it's going to be released on December 5. Essentially, similar to everyone here and similar to those of you behind the book, clearly the education to employment journey is fraught with much challenge and much obstacle. And the unemployed youth, so the 75 million are casualties of some of that. But also, frankly, we have a lot of PhD students who are working as baristas in your corner cafe. So we have a lot of underemployment as well in different markets. And particularly based on different specializations of what people studied, et cetera. So we were spurred to engage in a research effort ourselves, which we sponsored as McKinsey. And what we sought to do was to try to contribute to the data creation. So we did 2 things. So we went around the world and found over 100 cases of successful education to employment solutions across 25 countries. And we chose them based on their employability outcomes and their degree of innovativeness, if I can use that as a term. And then we also conducted a survey of education providers, employers, and youth across 9 countries around the world, and chose them based on a range of diversity in terms of geography, social context, as well as just development stage, if you will. And so we took those 2 and then have gone through a comprehensive analysis. And I will just share some of the headlights because I think we want our audience to be able to ask questions, and you've all been sitting very patiently over the last hour and a half. But so first and foremost, we find that education providers, employers, and youth live in fundamentally parallel universes. It's often hard to believe that we're talking about the same thing. So when you ask employers and youth about the readiness of graduates for the job market, you'll find actually something that's fairly resonant. When you ask that of education providers, complete outlier. So they are just much more optimistic than our youth and employers. When you equally, ask education providers about, what is the reason why your youth or why your students are dropping out of the system, they'll say, oh, well, it was because it was too hard for them. You ask the youth and they'll say, well, we couldn't afford it. Right? So it's just by what we were seeking to do was to ask the same question of the 3 parties, to see what is it that they perceive to be the reality of the situation, because you have to get at that to be able to understand how to fix this. So we see parallel universes. We see complete lack of a system, as I mentioned before. And we try to understand and to really diagnose what are the obstacles at 3 points. So from enrolling in post-secondary education to building skills to finding a job. And we try to find exactly what are the disconnects between these 3 groups across each of those. And then we also were looking to see, who's actually successful in this job market. Right? And so we actually find that there are a minority of youth and employers that are actually successful with their outcomes. And we segmented both the employer population and the youth population because, to Branka's point, they are not monoliths. And you have to understand what are the circumstances of each youth segment or each employer segment to be able to design a set of interventions that really supports them to achieve their maximum potential, whatever that may be. And then we tried to spend quite a bit of time then on the solution, because it's never helpful to just talk about the problem. And so as we looked across the cases, so we found, frankly, that there are a lot of commonalities across at least in our case, the 100+ programs, in terms of how education providers and employers interact with each other and what they do and how they function. It just happens infrequently and at very small numbers. I mean, sometimes it's not even hundreds. Sometimes it's, it's 20 people or 50 people, right? So it's just simply not enough to move the needle. And then try to understand what are the workarounds. I'll just speak to one, because technology is something which we've been discussing. We have learned from Germany about the importance of apprenticeships. And the world and youth also look at apprenticeships and would say, hands-on learning and learning on the job is by far the most effective way for us to learn a skill. But there just simply are not enough apprenticeships around the world. And there are not enough companies that are willing to invest and to offer them in such a way that is a rich learning experience. And so we actually think that there's great potential in simulation and gaming, so in serious games, that can now actually be designed in such a way, and the technology costs have been driven down to the point where you can offer this in a cost-effective manner, enable youth to have repeat experiences and to measure the amount by which they are learning each time they play the game. And the games can be customized around the work context, whatever is relevant for that profession. And so we actually think that simulation is likely to become the apprenticeship of the 21st century, and that in some ways the future of hands-on learning may be hands-off. And in so doing, enable a much broader swath of youth to be able to avail themselves. So I'll just pause here, happy to speak more to the report in response to questions.
Thank you, Mona. Indeed, you all have been waiting very patiently. Mona pointed to the book. For those of you who don't have the hard copy, I want to tell you that it is available online at our new website at worldbank.org/skills. So feel free to go there. So I just want to reflect back a little bit what I heard and then open it up for your questions and comments. And I'm going to give them in very stylized and simplistic way. So I heard skill mismatches, not that big of a deal. There are many other issues that are important as far as job creation is concerned. I heard that even if there is a skill mismatch issue, what countries are doing is fraught with problems, with government failures in the search for correcting for market failures. There may actually be creating more damage. At best, the programs are useless, and they generally go to those that would have created the jobs anyway. One good example that we all point to, at least as far as, and Klaus granted that, in terms of having an impact on low levels of youth employment, the German approach, highly context-specific in terms of its social organization, difficult to replicate elsewhere. Broken education system that cannot keep up with technology anyway. And I've been working or looking at this area for some time, and it's always been an area where we have always raised more issues, more problems, and have been short of solutions, because it's fine to point to all the problems with everything policymakers do, but we end up having to face policymakers that say, I have a problem, I need a solution to my problem, and I need it tomorrow. Don't tell me I have to start when the woman is pregnant and the fetus is just developing. That's fine, but I have a large number of youth that don't have good jobs at the moment, and what can I do? So a few things that I heard that at least provide some rays of light. We talked about the possibility of fostering social organizations that could be context-specific, in particular to foster multi-sectoral collaboration to get people to work together. We heard about the potential of programs that focus on the youth, comprehensive youth programs, but they are expensive to work well. They really have to be tailored to the individual, and scalability is a concern. We heard about the possibility of good training when one thinks carefully about how to structure that contractual arrangement, pay for performance schemes. And we heard about technology both as an issue, but at the end also the possibility of technology providing a solution as well. So those are the things that I heard. Now I'd like to throw it open to you. And I think at this point I'll forgo my prerogative of asking the last question, because I'm guessing there are going to be many from the audience here. So let's just hear from you. Please let us know who you are. And depending on how many people have questions, we might do several rounds. And if you would like to indicate the panelists that you would want to respond to your question, let me know.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for, as the presenter said, a very timely and topical book launch. I'm Raju Singh. I'm the lead economist on Central Africa. A perspective from that region, so low-income countries. I take the point that the panelists have made, that engaging the education or education providers with the employers is an important step. But in many of my countries, I mean, the formal employers represent a tiny share of labor force. The major share is in formal sectors. So in this setting, I mean, how do you engage with these numerous mono-employee enterprises? Thank you.
Mind coming up to the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. The topic is very interesting, but my problem, the 2 points that have been made here. One, employment is a function of GDP growth. And two, that technology takes out people or shrinks the job because of productivity. So in this world, where is the equilibrium? Should we look to rationalize within the system, or can we find a way of expanding the job? How do we expand? Because for us, especially in the industrial world, you need high productivity to increase GDP. But that leaves out people. On the other hand, when you go to the developing countries, they train and train and train. They don't have jobs. I think there are more maybe educated people in Africa or even in Washington, D.C. from Africa than the people in the United States by average level of education. So how do you solve that problem? My name is Ephraim Asaba. I'm a consultant here in the bank.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rafael de Hoyos from Education LAC. And given what Miguel was describing as a very difficult task of matching the needs of the labor market with what we are producing in the education sector, and that this is becoming more and more difficult because of innovation, because of technology change. Also, given that we know very little about how to reduce the gap or eliminate the gap, there are very, very few successful programs. And given a third fact that was not mentioned, but that given that there are limited resources in any education system, should we really, as education providers, try to eliminate this problem, or should we just use all the resources available to provide general skills like math and languages, as opposed to trying to go via the vocational and training route. This question is for the whoever in the panel is willing to answer. Thanks.
Yes, Omar.
Thank you. I think that provokes me to ask a question. I guess I would like to hear from the panelists on this issue of training and aging. Certainly in Germany and in the region I work on now in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, this is a big problem. I mean, there are issues with youth unemployment, but demographic change basically means that the big issue for these countries will be how to keep older workers more productive and longer in the workforce. And what we know recently from neuroscience, psychology, is that learning over the life cycle is a very different thing. Training an old brain, as they say, or an aging brain is very different from training a young person. From your experience, what are successful examples of training delivery that takes into account this issue of aging?
This question is for Miguel Székely. He mentioned that there is one promising approach of setting competencies from the private, jointly between the government and the private sector. That might be a way to, to improve training of the existing workforce of the adults. So I wanted to know from your experience what has been the effect, or whether this type of approaches have any results. Thanks.
Why don't we take those? And maybe we'll start with Branka and just go down the line. So I have, you can pick which one you want, but I'll make sure we get to all 5 of them. So there's a question about how do you engage the employees when they're largely informal? Is productivity a blessing or a curse? Should schools give up on vocational skills training and just focus on general? Can you teach an old dog new tricks? And what about the competency-based training?
Well, let me try to address first the lack of jobs. I mean, we know that there is, I think, 1.2 billion good jobs right now in the world, and 3 billion people who are either working or need to work. So there's definitely a huge gap there. To solve this problem, it's not enough to have the best training systems. It's not enough to have a tremendous match of skills and to the requirements of employers. I think there's 2 ways to go. One is the systemic change, breaking the system and making a new system that will work better altogether. The other one is a disruptive solution, taking the work and saying, all that we ever believed about what is a job, we should throw that away, and we should think about new work models, redefining work, maybe breaking jobs into highly specialized increments and then having people just do those increments, because having them do everything, especially as an entry level, is impossible. So I think that we need to think in a different way, because what we are doing obviously is not solving the problem. So that's one. The other thing is that there is a great focus on entrepreneurship in the recent years, and obviously it's a very important topic, especially entrepreneurship education for everybody, because even corporate, even our employers are asking for this type of skills in no matter what position. But we also have to be very responsible how we are pushing young people into opening businesses and failing them afterwards with any type of support. So I don't think entrepreneurship in general is the answer for all our problems always. So that's
Miguel, you have one addressed specifically at you, so you can't skip that one, but also welcome to pick up.
Yeah, 2 brief comments. The first on Rafael's question about the role of education systems. I think that definitely where the world is moving is towards especially secondary education that is more competencies-based. And I think that in that context, it is a very relevant question if that part of the education system should address specifically particular kinds of skills or not. And perhaps in the McKinsey or in the Manpower studies, you could perhaps have some data on this, but the skill that now is more valued is the capacity to learn for a new job or over the life cycle. And that is not acquired through memorizing the elements table in chemistry or memorizing different passages of history. It's acquired through a totally different education model where, if achieved, perhaps technical and vocational education would be obsolete because those are not the skills, that particular kinds of skills and training are not valued as much anymore. But it is definitely an area, a huge area for discussion. And on models, countries like Mexico and Chile have been evolving towards models where in vocational education and training and in training programs, they follow a system similar to the traditional school system. In the traditional school system, you earn a degree, and the first thing you ask a person for a job is, where did you study? Where is your degree from? And in training, that doesn't happen. The role of these new certification systems is to create precisely a signaling system similar to that. Create standards that can be acquired through training, but that can be certified and evaluated so that when someone comes looking for a job, it's not only what degree you have from which university, but what skills can you have you certified on, and that facilitates the identification of a profile of worker, and also gives an incentive to the worker to acquire those skills and have this signaling mechanism that can have some